Welcome to another episode of Salesforce Connect, and we have the pleasure of having Tiago Ruivo here from Wise Wolves, one of the greatest architects I know here in the Salesforce ecosystem. So great to have you, Tiago.
Wait to be here, Alan. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, same here. So why don't we start from the beginning? How do you get into the Salesforce ecosystem, and how do you make your way into Wise?
It was actually by chance when I started in the Salesforce ecosystem about 15 years ago. While I was in grad school, I was actually I had a couple of jobs there in the university, and part of the jobs was in the IT department, and part of my job was actually maintaining and developing for Salesforce. And so my first job was kind of within the Salesforce org of the university, trying to kind of work a little bit as a developer and as an admin. And from there, my career kind of went in another direction, but I ended up being recruited by Blue Wolf as a Salesforce developer. And ever since, I've been kind of more professionally in the ecosystem again for the last, almost 15 years at this point. How I got to Wise Wolves was very much because of Michael Vukovic, which is the founder, right? I worked with him for 6 years at Blue Wolf. And so he then, again, we kind of split careers. I spent a lot of time at actual Salesforce as an architect there. And he went in and went to found Wise Wolves and was looking for a CTO and a kind of a more technical person. And so we remained in touch. We were friends for the entire time. And so this was when he came to me with the offer, it was pretty obvious that it was a great place to be and a good place to land. And it's been a ride since. I've been here for a little bit over a year and a half at this point.
Love it. And I know you guys do a lot of work in the healthcare and life sciences industries. That's a very or highly regulated industry. What are some best practice you follow in customizing Salesforce, helping companies use Salesforce to navigate this complex environment?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that obviously like industries like, financial services, healthcare are fairly regulated. The best practices themselves are not that different from the best practices you have on other customers, right? And on other enterprise customers. Ultimately, we really lead with, kind of these industry best practices principles of like, making sure that people only have access to the data they need, right? The idea of principle of least privilege and making sure that we are, advising our customers on, restricting access to data and only providing access to data as a ad hoc basis. We work a lot with them to make them comfortable with Salesforce and making sure that, not just they trust Salesforce to contain their data and they kind of take Salesforce through their, certification protocols and make sure that Salesforce is following the guidelines that their IT infrastructure security and IT security establish, but also that they have activated those guidelines in their org, right? A lot of times people have access to Salesforce, but security in Salesforce is kind of a shared responsibility. And so not just Salesforce is obviously HIPAA compliant and SOC 2 compliant, but also people need to activate things like Shield, need to activate things like, multi-factor authentication. And so we work a lot with customers to make sure that not just they have access to those features, but they have those features active. So ultimately, a lot of work on the keeping PHI and PII data very much secure, but also just, making security part of the implementations that we go through with our customers.
Love it. And how do you balance keeping Salesforce simple for the different users? On one hand, you have clinicians that you want to make them have as little clicks and have a very scalable system. Sometimes you may have leadership that they want dashboard and they want scalable architecture. So how do you balance these two with building a powerful bus tool for everyone?
That's a great question. And I mean, that's usually, I think on bringing back to the security piece, I don't think those are mutually exclusive, right? So you can definitely have a simple system where people have access to the information they need and where they actually use the security features without necessarily, making the system overly complicated, right? That can still be simple because Salesforce makes it simple and provides the tools to make that available out of the box, right? I think more in general, that is again not different than other industries and then other implementations. Ultimately, it's really about taking time at the beginning to work with these organizations to really help define their processes, right? So that they mostly adhere to the ways that Salesforce provide to doing things out of the box, right? So a lot of times what ends up happening is that people come from other systems or people come from ingrown systems. People don't necessarily have their processes defined. And so as we get into implementations, they tend to overcomplicate things or they tend to make things how they think it would happen. And they end up not using any of the functionality that Salesforce provides out of the box. And that is ultimately what causes a lot of the overcomplexity and the technical debt. And so what we work with customers to do is making sure that we are defining the right personas from the beginning and we are guiding those personas through their business process while still using a lot of the features that Salesforce provides out of the box from Health Cloud to Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, so that we are actually adapting their process. We are adapting their process to maximize the usage of the platform, right? And so we are making the tweaks that are necessary so that they take full advantage of the comfortability of the platform. And that is ultimately what allows them to scale when they have processes that are simple, that play well with what the platform does well, and that do not require us to kind of go, build a bunch of technical debt and over customization that is not maintainable or scalable, right?
Right. No, I think that that's very important, and I would like to double click there a little.
Mm-hmm.
I think another challenge in the HLS industry is that sometimes you might need to integrate with like an EMR or ERP system that is legacy, and you'd have great pipes to connect the data. So what are some of the architectural challenges you face when trying to integrate Salesforce with some of these legacy systems, and how do you work around that?
Yeah, absolutely. EMRs are terrible to integrate with because they have, you know, terrible APIs. They've been around for a long time. It's super complicated to get data in and out. And so, as far as best practices here, obviously, there's just from a business best practice, making sure that we are building the right things, right? And so, like, not necessarily integrating for the sake of integrating, but finding the use cases that Salesforce really excels at, finding the use cases that the EMR really excels at, and then finding what are the integration points that need to occur and when those systems need to talk to each other. So do not overbill integrations for the sake of integrations. I think it's fundamental, right? And then afterwards is honestly using a lot of what Salesforce offers already, right? And so I'll point out two things. I think that one thing is Health Cloud is really powerful because it follows the FHIR standard. And so it has an abstraction of their data model that allows, that adheres to a very, extended standard for EMRs, particularly in the United States. And so leveraging the FHIR APIs that Salesforce and that Health Cloud provide really allows us to easily integrate with other systems. The other thing that we really use well is MuleSoft, right? And I think that for some of these integrations, if they start getting very complex, MuleSoft makes a lot of sense to make sure that we are building something that is scalable, that is maintainable, that where it's easy to transform data, where it can adhere to any kinds of security protocols that those EMRs may have in place. And so, you know, knowing when an integration becomes complex enough to leverage MuleSoft and rather than custom building it in Salesforce, actually using an integration platform where that is much more maintainable and scalable and powerful. It's something that we've done very successfully with a lot of EMRs.
Love it. And I'm curious, how do you keep up with constant change in the sector? I mean, technology is evolving. How do you keep up with all these changes, and where do you see the role of a Salesforce architect evolving over the next few years, especially with data cloud or like data 360 now and AI?
Yeah, keeping up with Salesforce is becoming more and more complicated the more they keep buying other things. And so I remember when I first started in the ecosystem, I mean, like release notes were, 20 pages and it was easy to stay up to date, right? It's becoming more and more complicated. I think that I am still a fan of, and I still very much like to go through the release notes and finding kind of some hidden nuggets. I think it's part of our job, right? I'm still very much active in my community here in Chicago, and I go to some of the user groups, and that allows me to kind of discuss with other people. And I have blogs like, I mean, Salesforce Ben, or people I follow on LinkedIn that are pretty good, at keeping me up to date on some of the things. I really find it interesting to actually follow some of the Salesforce PMs on LinkedIn for features that are important to you, like, Flow or Health Cloud or Data 360, because they really also help. They're doing a much better job at publicizing some of the features in some of the products. There you go. You do need to start, you know, finding what you think it's valuable, right? So I think that choosing areas within Salesforce that are actually relevant to what you typically build is also important, right? It's very complicated to become a super expert in everything, but we do have a good bunch of people here at Wise Wolves that can have like a fairly wide set of specializations within the product that allows us to cover a lot of what Salesforce releases. And so internally, even at Wise Wolves, we have a lot of KTs where people that are, for example, experts in Salesforce Voice, Service Cloud Voice, or in Marketing Cloud Growth can come in and talk to some of the features that are being released for that specific product. But honestly, it still requires you to, a lot of release notes, a lot of blogs, a lot of release webinars, a lot of user groups. It is kind of a complicated job to stay on top of everything for sure.
Love it. In terms of the HLS industry in particular, where do you see the biggest opportunities, or where do you see what trends do you see? Where do you see the industry shifting towards in the future?
Honestly, for us, like I mean, I think one of the things is that the HLS industry is actually very much still catching up severely from a very, 80s framework of, on-premise, very old systems that desperately need updating, right? And so I think that ultimately there is a lot of opportunity across the board in the HLS industry, because the HLS industry in general is still not super mature and consumer focused on their technology stack. We do see a lot of, so there's a couple of like, pieces of this. Like, I think that from a use case perspective, we do see a lot of focus on direct reaching out to the customers rather than kind of a more of a B2B model. And so a lot of, like customer experience, customer success, customer interaction use cases are super present in our, like in our customer list, and we see them as opportunities, making sure that, if you are a life sciences customer, your customer directly is aware of what the kinds of things you do. If you are a provider, you can actually provide a good customer experience to someone going to your clinic, to your hospital, to your whatever, which hasn't been very traditional in healthcare. If you're a payer, same thing, that the customer is actually very aware of what is the status of their claims, how do you actually, go through approvals. So customer experience, I think we see as a pretty big piece of it. And then interoperability, which is the other big piece that has been a struggle in healthcare, like, having systems talking to each other, making information available throughout all the different steps of the healthcare process, from, intake to insurance companies to clinics to, the different parts of the care team, from the clinician to the operations team. So all of that has been very complex and complicated and not the best thing within healthcare. And so we see those as huge opportunities within the industry. And obviously the other big piece is that there's a lot of new players, right? There's a lot of new folks and new companies and new startups taking advantage of, like, a lot of med devices, a lot of medical tech and other, like, technologies outside of Salesforce that are being born to make healthcare more efficient. Value based healthcare companies where, like, they're trying to provide healthcare more on a value based model instead of the per service model. So there are also a lot of new players and a lot of new innovation that is also a good opportunity within healthcare.
Love it. That's great advice. And now shifting to more general, I've seen you run interviews, and especially technical interviews. You have a really good eye for technical talent. So if you could give one piece of advice to someone starting their technical career, in Salesforce, what would it be?
Honestly, I think one of the things that I really, for developers in Salesforce, they do tend to focus. Developers in Salesforce oftentimes only learn the code piece of Salesforce, right? So they really learn only kind of Apex and Lightning Web Components. To be a good developer in Salesforce, you really need to know how the metadata piece works, right? And so making sure that you are learning not just how Apex and how LWC work, and you are actually learning, you know, a little bit of Data 360, Data Cloud, a little bit of like, are proficient in Flow, are proficient in Omni script, and can plug your code into all those things so that you are a well-rounded developer, I think is pretty fundamental. And it's something that oftentimes pure developers do not do. And then the other thing that I would kind of advise everyone starting their more technical career in Salesforce is find a user group that you can join, right? So find your nonprofit user group close to you, find your kind of your community within the Salesforce ecosystem, because it really is a way for you to network, to find other people, to potentially get actually some experience in your belt. You can volunteer or do some pro bono work for a nonprofit and kind of start getting a portfolio that really allow you to stand out from someone that just took a couple of trailhead courses or something like that, right? And so get to know the declarative part of the platform and join a user group. I think are for me the two biggest pieces of advice.
Love it, love it. This been a great conversation, Tiago. Where can people find you, connect with you?
LinkedIn, Tiago Ruivo, Wise Wolves. I think it's a good place for now. And if not, shoot me an email too. I'm always available. Love to connect with new people and to grow the community.
Awesome. This was
Wisewolves.com.
great. Love it. This was great, Tiago. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Great talking to you.
Thank you.